Welcome back to the Master Runeterra podcast with Jay and also Jay. That's right. Two times Jason, better than one. I got Jasensational, Jason did. I just call him Sexy Jason because they tried to number us early on as Jason 1 and Jason 2. And I was like, no, we're not having that. Bay's not feeling really well. So Jason was kindly filled in for him. So you got two times the Jason. So Jason, welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
How you doing?
Yeah,
How's your day going?
doing good. Happy Friday.
Yeah, right.
It's good to end the work week on a solid here.
Totally. 8 days away from seasonals. It's an exciting time. Are you going to be playing there's the OLS tournament tomorrow? Do you know if you're going to play that or anything else before Wednesday night Runeterra?
Yeah, Wednesday night Runeterra,
Got it.
I haven't really been planning that. I guess it's like the second time I've heard about it. But I did plan the Runeterra Academy tournament yesterday, and so I'm feeling pretty confident about what I have rocking forward.
Oh, how did that go for you?
It was all right. I won 2 games and I lost 1, so I guess like I sort of dropped out of that afterwards. But like I felt really solid with my lineup, and they had a little bit of technical issues at the end, so we didn't actually get to the end of it. But I'm feeling solid about it.
Nice. Yeah, you can get like a general feel of like how your decks are like performing, right? And that's almost like more important than like any winning or losing.
Right.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about? I know we want to talk about your history in the game and stuff, but since we're already on it, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're playing right now in the current meta for anyone that might want to follow in your footsteps? You're playing some of the most powerful decks, I think, in the meta currently.
Yeah, I think like the meta right now is just a lot of like either some of the more mid-range stuff, like the Plunder, the GP, I guess it's the same deck. The Plunder, the Silver Auction, the Lurk, which I guess are the 3 decks that I'm playing. And there's some of the solar decks like the Darkness, I guess Thralls kind of puts in that category, the Lee Sin. And then there's the faster decks, right? There's the Zed Poppy, any kind of rally or burn aggro deck like the Scion. And my game plan right now is just to avoid the faster stuff, the rally, the Poppy rally, the Scion. I would really hate to see a lineup with both of those in there, which I don't think is going to be seeing that much. And I haven't even been seeing that much like Scion on ladder recently. So hopefully that's going to be underrepresented. That's kind of my hedge and my bet. I'm hoping that a lot of people are just coming to this tournament looking to target Plunder, and I'll take the target there on Plunder, but like Silver Auction and the Lurk should beat up like on most of the decks that try to target Plunder, which is kind of funny. But that's kind of my plan looking forward into this tournament. There's like a lot of just like the in the middle kind of decks that want to play for it, and I feel like Plunder, Lurk, and Silver Auction just kind of power out most of those.
Yeah, that was a really good breakdown there. Kind of saying like the mid range, the slower stuff, the faster stuff. I think because I mean you basically covered like the whole meta. There's not too many decks that don't fall into those like I don't know 9 kind of slots. Yeah, and speaking of Scion Draven, why do you think it has fallen off so much? Because I haven't seen it in for forever either. And coming into the season, end of last season, it was like I don't know, maybe the default best deck. It was really considered very, very powerful.
Yeah, I think like in the last week, like, I saw Gigas publish an article that was like 6 top decks to beat Scion, or I guess that was 2 weeks ago, and this week was Plunder. But I feel like, people just got sick of playing Scion and they started trying to find counters to Scion. And now that, the nerfs have been impactful, it's lost a lot of its mid-range capacity. So it has to play a little bit more for like the burn style decks, which I think has affected its game plan in some of the matchups. So there's more decks out there that kind of have that breathing space to handle with it. So I think like GP, like the rise of GP Sedge, which is a decent deck into Draven Scion, has probably prompted a little bit less Scion gameplay in general. And like I feel like the only like really strong reason to play Scion is into like the rally decks, which is a very highly represented deck on ladder, but I don't feel like there's too many other decks that are really, really sad to see Scion. Except for the decks I'm playing. So I'm just taking a little bit of a bet there that hopefully people are sick of playing Scion. People feel like Scion might be countered, and I will just kind of sneak right through that.
Right. So yeah, speak to me about how your decks do against Scion. 'Cause those are like three matchups that I actually don't know very much at all. So against GP Sedge, Sivir, Action, and Lurk.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't think I played either side of that matchup against Draven Scion.
Yeah, those are definitely rough matchups. I guess the least rough for the three is GP Sedge, just because once you have the Sedge down on board, it's kind of hard for the Scion player to push any more damage. Seeing like a leveled Scion coming down on 7 after your leveled Sedge on turn 6 isn't really that big of a threat. So if I was going to Scion, I would expect the ban onto there. But if I had to be playing into Scion, like Sivir auction decks,
How close is that matchup? GP Sedge versus
I'm,
Draven Scion. Is it like
I'm
50
not.
50 or
Yeah, 50-50 sounds about right.
at least how do you feel about it? Because I mean, the
Sure.
the group fig stats are always sus.
Yeah. Tech out. I actually haven't played that matchup even once. I don't think.
Oh, really?
I'm going off of
Okay.
theory here.
Okay.
But from what I heard, it's like a 50-50. But it really drops off for like Sivir and Lurk, where those might be like 30-40s into like Scion. But like
Right. So you're hitting the ban hammer, like
yeah,
style the other bull. Yeah.
right.
Okay.
But like Henneke says he's positive into Scion. Like I can like manage Lurk into Scion, but it's definitely something I'm not really happy to play into. So that's definitely on the list of the banhammer.
Gotcha. Um. Okay. Let's run through a couple of the other decks. I'm curious how your matchup spread looks into these. Like, how about against Lisa?
I think my lineup is, or at least like I would expect to. If I played into Lee Sin, I would want to be winning that matchup. Obviously, Lee Sin can kind of just like win almost anything given the chance. But my deck should just be favored into Lee Sin statistically and by my own personal experience.
Right. Yeah. I can see a lot of those being, close. Lee's always kind of like that, right? You put Lee in the hands of a good pilot, it's always gonna be a hard fought battle no matter what. Um, what about into like the rally decks?
Ooh, second ban. Between Scion and Rally, it's a tough call which one I'm wanting to ban first, but I think Scion's just slightly worse, and I can kind of struggle against, or like I can like struggle my way through like a Rally matchup where if I draw the right cards, whereas like my decks just don't have way of dealing with Scion. That's just kind of like a roadblock that you really can't get through.
Right, right. So are you looking for opponents that are kind of like also on Action Sivir, GP Sedge, and then like, I don't know, like a rally deck or something, or a Scion deck, you just ban that and then go up against those other two? Is that kind of the game plan?
Yeah, so like I definitely don't mind playing into any of the mirrors. I think if I face into a very similar matchup as mine, the hardest matchup for me would just be like Lurk into Plunder. But like a lot of these matchups, like the mid-range ones, even the mirrors are just like against the three decks that I'm bringing are all like very like manageable and beatable. And so I don't feel very uncomfortable into any of them. And I think that if they're not on a combination of both Draven Sun and Rally, I feel like I have a pretty good chance against pretty much anything.
Yeah, fair enough. And then rounding it out, how do you feel against some of the slower decks? I guess like Darkness, for instance.
Yeah, and that's like kind of where I want to pray into. Like the Darkness really struggles against all Plunder, Lurk, and what's it called, Auction Civ. I even put in like a third Rally just to like really find that way to just push through. But definitely if anyone tries to bring anything slower to either counter Scion or Plunder, I should have a decent opportunity to kind of just rake in some of those wins.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I mean, we've seen a lot of players have success. Like Majin did that. The last season was he top 32. I think the open rounds, he was like, I just want to play mirrors all day. That was his thing. And he had a lot of success doing that. Do you feel comfortable in like the mirror matches? Is that something you're kind of coming prepared for? Because those are Silver Action, Plunder, especially. Those are definitely like two of the more popular decks. I imagine they'll see quite a bit at seasonals.
Yeah, like generally across the board, I dislike most mirror matchups. But it's kind
A
of
lot of people do.
yeah, it's kind of like pick your poison. Like these are like the three decks that I feel least bad about playing the mirror. Just because like every mirror is going to come down to the draw, but even if you have like slightly worse hand, there's always ways to come back out of it. Unlike where like a Shellfolk mirror, for example, which I particularly despise. Like if one player draws their Glorious Evolution and you don't, then it's just kind of GG. So I definitely feel like there's a lot more breathing room in these three, like for these three decks, Sivir, Auction, Lurk, and Plunder, for a little bit more counterplay to them. And that's from trying to just get that skill level over them.
Totally. Yeah. Those grindy mid-range decks, right? Lots of back and forth, lots of opportunity to outplay your opponent. Speaking of outplaying opponents, so when you made top 32 of your the seasonals that you top 32, uh you qualified through Gauntlet. Is that correct?
That was the first one. And then after that, it's always just been ladder.
Okay. But the one that you qualified for seasonal through Gauntlet, you top 32 though, right? You made the top cut. Yeah. So I actually didn't know that until like quite recently. Do you know, has anyone else done that?
So actually, in that also in that same top 32, there was one more person who came from Gauntlet. They're like a silver player, where I was
Okay, I remember
like
that.
I was in Diamond 3 or something like that. Outside of that, there must be, but nothing just as like recognizable to me that I've really paid attention to. But
Right.
it's definitely good to see. That's like kind of what Gauntlet's there for.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So why don't you take us back through that a little bit? Let's go to the Wayback Machine. I also don't know when you actually started playing the game, or if you played other card games, before this. Why don't you give us a little like nutshell of your like competitive um life?
Yeah, definitely. I started card games in Hearthstone. I
Okay.
excuse me. So in like high school, I picked up Hearthstone, played it for a few years throughout college, and then it was when Runeterra came out in April, I believe. A friend introduced me to it in like June or something like that, and that's kind of when I really picked up Runeterra. At that point, I was like pretty on and off within Hearthstone. Even within Hearthstone, I didn't really play competitively at all. I guess like I was a little bit more than a casual. I would hit legend every month, which is the equivalent of masters in Runeterra. But I wasn't really pursuing anything like competitively there. I wasn't like really trying to like climb legend ladder or anything like that. So I picked up Runeterra just shortly after it started. I guess this was like a mid to late Bilgewater release. And I
Okay.
was just like playing throughout that, like a couple months. You have the June to like December when they announced the first seasonals. I was kind of just like playing around for fun because I was a pretty casual player. I was playing other games. Runeterra definitely wasn't my focus as it is nowadays. And so I was definitely surprised to see that I was able to make it so far, especially in the first season.
Yeah. How exciting was that for you? The first seasons was a big deal, right? Like, everyone, it was the first one. No one really knew what to expect. It was like single elimination practically. You had to go 5-0 to make the
Yeah.
top cut and then like keep going. So yeah, okay. So first off, what were the 5 rounds for you like? And what did you play?
Oh man. Jesus. So the 5 rounds were like, well, I'll give a little bit of a backstory to it. So we have the prime glories, into the final gauntlet, things like that.
Good on you
So
for figuring out how that works, by the way.
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
6 months in, I still couldn't tell you how it
yeah.
works.
Like
I
the
didn't
first
know.
week was like I played a gauntlet, I lost that one, then I won. Like one within the same week, and I didn't get the token. I was like, wait a minute, how did this work? But like by the because I actually enjoyed like playing Gauntlet and whatever, because back then in the first season it was like the singleton gauntlet and the pick
Oh,
three
right.
band one gauntlet. So those were like, fresh like game modes, at least for me who never really played in any of those formats before. So I actually liked playing Gauntlet for fun, but I just like got the prime glories on the side, right? And then when they announced like the seasonal things, I was like, I had a couple prime glories. I just needed like, to win 2 gauntlet games to qualify for the qualifiers, which is like, yeah, that'd be kind of cool if I did that, right? It's like they announced this competitive thing. Why don't I just give it a try, right? And so I do that and I'm like qualifying. But at that point I have no competitive experience in like any card games. I don't have like any experience building a lineup or anything like that. And so that was just really down to just like taking 3 decks that were like pretty good comfort picks. which happened to be like this it was like a Weimar Targon. So like Weimar used to be like a thing in like Ionia way back when, and then when Targon came out, they kind of put that into it. I mean, no one
Okay,
played
right.
the deck because it wasn't like that good at or whatever. But I was that was kind of like my style of deck that I enjoyed, just like the more controlly stuff at the point. The second deck, I think I played Field Rush, so in the same manner, just like a very slow control deck.
Nice.
And then for a third deck, so I played Yasuo Katarina.
Go hard,
Right?
right?
No,
It's obviously go hard, right? Oh,
no,
okay, okay.
Go Hard was like the one deck I just didn't break. But I brought Yasuo Katarina, which was a decision I made at the last hour when I was just testing decks in Diamond, and I won like 4 games in a row with it. And I was like, huh, okay, sounds about good. Because I didn't care how far I went in this. I was like, I'm happy to play. I'm rolling in with these weird ass decks that I
Is
like
this
to
where your
play.
love of Yaz has come from?
Exactly.
Of course.
This is like the milestone,
that.
right?
Right.
Yeah, so I'm playing these 3 jumbo decks that at least I have a good. At this point, like I play them enough because I'm like try harding preparing for like my first tournament, and so I have a good idea of like the matchups. Like, okay, I'm gonna ban Draven Ezreal, which was like a super strong deck. I'm gonna ban Fiora Shen, another like super powerful strong deck. And I'm just gonna try to I don't know. I was feeling calm about beating Go Hard, which seems really strange because that was the strongest deck of the time. I guess like Field Rush and Go Hard is like one of the counters, but that was my plan. I rolled into it. Each round goes by, I grab a win. I'm texting my friend, oh yeah, I just won this round. These are the matchups that I played, and yada yada. And then round after round, and then go to round 5, and I just like crush that thing too. It was the fastest 2 I've ever had. And and then I was playing the top 32. It's fucking crazy.
Were you excited? We were like,
Hell yeah.
yeah, fuck yeah. Were you, do you start thinking like, maybe you're just like actually just pretty good at this game? Like you just picked it up and just smashed.
That feeling didn't hit until afterwards. I was still living the high. Like I wasn't expecting to be there. I felt like I got pretty lucky. And the 5 round like single elimination is like a lot more luck based than it is nowadays, I guess. So there's definitely a feeling of luck to it. And so I definitely felt like I had a little something to prove in there. And
Right.
so, there's 1 week between open rounds and seasons, and that's not like I really, really hit it hard. I was like playing like 5 hours of ladder a day with my decks. Because, I was playing by myself. I didn't have anyone to scrim with either. And so I was just playing my decks on ladder like all day, every day for like a whole week. And I I remember like there's this one swim video where he was talking about like how to prepare for like a seasonal tournament, which is one that it's like watch and repeat. And at the end of the video, I remember he had a section just talking about like decks that you might need to watch out for because like the people who top 32 like might bring them. And he glossed over this Yasuo deck, trying his best not to make it sound like absolute garbage. But it was so hilarious because because at that time I like was really into watching all these YouTubers because I was like a pretty big fanboy and also relatively new to the game. So I was like fanboying over Swim, just like talking about this Yasuo deck. And that like, it's hard to like set me up any higher than that when you said all this adrenaline pumping through you.
That's awesome. Oh, that's so fun. Um, and how is your, from then to now, how has your relationship with the game kind of changed and like where are you at now? Because like you've moved from the West Coast to some terrible, terrible other coast. And you're going to school, things are obviously different. Freaking cat. So yeah, so how, what's what's I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. My cat will not is just joining the podcast now. Um, how has your relationship changed with the game? Where are you at now? Are you looking forward to the announcement that's coming out next year? Like if they were to announce, say, I don't know, some big prize money or like some sort of tour to go qualify for, would that spark your interest? Would that get you playing a bunch of hours again every day or where are you at?
Yeah, like every season that's passed since the first, I've progressively gone a little bit more invested in trying to play competitively. Like, the first season I just brought like some 3 random decks. The second season, I brought 2 of the strongest decks, but then I brought a random deck. And from there on out, third season, it was Thresh Gnosis, Asol, and TLC. Like, bam. Like from there on out, like I was putting myself a little bit more into like trying to do well in like tournaments, things like that. Maybe not like try to like pick up some like weird shit that might not work. So I was definitely more invested in trying to not only like be a better player, but also just like try to win tournaments a little bit more. Um, I still play a lot of ladder. Every season that goes by, I might like play like 2 hours a day at the very least. So it's still like a moderate amount. I'm working full time, so there's some days where I might not play as much, but I make like a good effort of it to climb ladder and then like to try my best to play in tournaments as well. But I found myself just taking the game a little bit more seriously as time goes on. Like every season, I like say to myself, I'm gonna take first 2 weeks of the season to just play new decks, and that never happens because I just like I take the old decks, I start climbing, hit masters, and then at that point, like I can like play some new decks. Nope, I just continue climbing.
Well, you can't
And
give away the LP then, right? Like
yeah,
you got to keep
exactly.
going.
Once you hit
Once you
200,
complete
you don't want to
LP.
drop to 0, and once you hit
Yeah.
300, you don't go back to 100. And so that has taken away a little bit of the enjoyment, especially when I came into the game. That was just like what I love to do, just like play new decks or play whatever like the streamers are playing. But I have taken a little bit more effort to try to focus out on that, and I kind of slightly missed out on Worlds. I was like marginally on the line to like play in the qualifiers. And so that's definitely a goal that I have set out for me. And if, waiting for that competitive announcement drop, I'll definitely try my best to get on whatever that's going on.
Yeah, nice. I was right there behind you. Basically, well, actually, you would have qualified
Well, I was in
like,
Cabot
had
spot,
you.
but
Yeah, had you exactly. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe you dodged a bullet. But yeah, that's funny that you bring that up. I kind of forgot. Like, yeah, there will be eventually something big like Worlds, maybe it's Worlds, to go qualify for again. And I don't know, for some reason that escapes me. Um, so for people, that are maybe now where you were at the first seasonals, what have you kind of learned along the way of kind of any thoughts on, for anyone that's out there trying to climb the ladder right now, maybe trying to qualify for seasonals next weekend? Let's start there. Then we'll move on to actual tournament prep.
um, I think at least from the first seasonals, because I think one of the weird parts was also in Diamond 3, right? I just never felt like I could hit Masters. But after the qualifiers, when I had that 1 week to really just like get comfortable with my decks, suddenly I breeze into Masters pretty easily, and then I get to like 200 or so LP, which at that time was like pretty impressive, just because it was like 2,000 people in Masters or whatever. And I felt like I just really took that time to just like get to know the decks that I was playing. And like this Yasuo Katarina mumbo jumbo, like I didn't know how to play it at first either.
Did you
And
switch or were you able to switch or no between the.
yeah, you can still switch. I still brought it, but I just like changed
Okay.
the deck list a little bit. I took that week to like really refine it down to what I felt comfortable, or at least what I thought was going to be good. To absolutely new player. But I took that time to really get to know the deck, really get to know which matchups I could win, how I could win those matchups. So I think my actually favorite example is playing into Go Hard. I just love that matchup for some reason, just because it was not a favorable matchup, but every time you won it, you did something right. And I feel like that's a really good way to treat like pretty much any matchup you play into. If you just, focus down on like 3 decks, at least 3 decks in a tournament format, and like 1 deck on ladder. And just like really get to know all the different matchups, the ins and out. How do you win each one? You'll really feel like you'll really see the improvement really quickly.
Yeah. It's interesting. Do you remember when you kind of like it dawned on you just how deep of a sort of like knowledge well that you could have like with a deck? Like your knowledge of a deck could just go ridiculously deep. You know, like there's been times when I've had just a bunch of reps on a deck. I'm very experienced with it. And then I don't know, it just goes like one level deeper. or one level higher if you go the other way. And it almost seems like it never ends. Because then eventually like what they start to do starts to change. And so what you have to do to counter that can change. And yeah, that always kind of blows my mind. And I always feel like a lot of people, myself included, when I first started playing, until I kind of realized that, um, I don't know. You like if you don't realize it, you don't know that there's just more to learn from each deck. I think most of us think, yeah, I play this deck pretty well. I'm probably like 95%, 99% correct. Like I'm crushing it. And in reality, you're probably like, like 70% or something playing the deck correctly. Do you remember having that kind of like aha moment, or like was there a certain deck that you went like really deep with and you were able to just like figure out certain matchups maybe that other people weren't, and things of that nature, and kind of have that light bulb?
Um, it's hard to say. It's a very vague concept. Even to today, I'm looking back. I played in the tournament yesterday, and one of my matchups was like streamed, and I'm looking back at it. Huh, I could have like approached this turn like two different ways. And so like there's always more room for that, and I'm obviously still trying my best to improve on that as well. But I think it just comes with a lot of experience the more you play. And like that's one of the advantages of having decks that continuously stay at the top. You just get like 4 seasons of practice into them,
Yeah.
and that definitely like scales over time. I don't think at the beginning, like I was really focusing on these 3 decks into these specific matchups, and I wouldn't care about the ones I'm banning, right? Just because I would never want to see them again. But with time, as long as you like put in the effort into it, and just like taking time like go over your plays, right? It doesn't have to be like matchup specific. It doesn't have to be like deck specific either. It's just at this moment I have 2 different choices, or even 3, or even 4 that I could make, and then just thinking about that in like a vacuum. And over time, that just like adds up. It's like 5 different instances in this matchup, or like I play this deck against like 5 different people, and like these 5 instances across all 5 games kind of just like line up and click together, and just like aha. And then that just like realizes how much different you can play a deck.
Yeah. And so how do you kind of improve and get better in practice? Are you watching a lot of your own videos back, like recording them and stuff, or your streams? Are you just kind of mentally trying to take note? Are you like actually taking notes? What's your process look like?
Definitely a lot more things I could be doing. I'm definitely one of those people that I feel like I'm not improving as like fast as I could be, or like over like a period of time. I don't know how much actually improving, which is definitely something vague in a card game where there's no like actual results to drive it besides like a win rate, which changes by the day or by the hour or whatever. So for me myself, I try to just take it in the moment as long as I'm thinking about the specific turn at the moment and not just like playing it brain dead. I feel like if I do that for every play over like a week or something, I'll just like mentally like it becomes like muscle memory or like mental memory, right? It's just like you're conditioned to do it, and then when you're in a position that you're thinking about every player, every turn, then like even if you make a mistake or anything like that, there's a reason behind it, right? And then I just don't put that much thought into it, and I guess that's kind of why like I don't necessarily look too much into like my old VODs and things like that. Um, I think it's like I think I found it that I like to like take my VODs and like a good one, right? One that I make no mistakes and then show somebody like, wow, this is really great. This is what happened, right? Because I think like how like teaching someone how to think like that is like a lot more than to like look back at like maybe some of your worst plays, or maybe it's just because you weren't thinking at all, right?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I wasn't thinking so much more of I mean, like, I was thinking more in the sense of like trying to find, misplays,
Mm,
or just like you say, if you have a lot of options, you don't know what they are. A good way is to like, show people, be like, what do you think? What do you think?
mm,
Um, it's tough though. Hey, it's like,
yeah,
especially when you get to like a really complex kind of game states and matchups. A lot of the ones that we're kind of seeing right now, when, there's so many different variables and different factors to take into consideration. There's sometimes that you just don't even know, or that almost no one knows. It's kind of like, well, it depends.
right.
It's kind of that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, it can be tough to improve for sure. Um, any other tips for climbing the ladder? Any other like little tricks or anything? Any things that you like to do that you feel like maybe help you out, give you a leg up?
Um, I do like to like climb. Occasionally, I like climb with somebody. It could be like someone the same level as me. It could be somebody who's maybe not as experienced. Doesn't really matter if you have someone you can climb with. And you know, there's some like some people would say it's like cheating or whatever. But like I even if I'm like not actually like taking any of their like decisions into like actually doing them or whatever, just having like a second voice at the moment, because I feel like that's a lot more valuable than like post moments. Like if you're reading a VOD with somebody, that's not as like impactful as like when you're actually playing, like you have the decision fresh in your head while you're making that decision. Like that's I feel like that's a lot more impactful to discuss like a potential like a pathway. Like if I take this path, this is gonna happen, but your friend says if you take this path, this might happen, right? And I feel like that's just a lot more valuable in the moment. And I think that's also what I try to internalize as well. Just I get a lot more repetitions in than like looking back at like a game. And I just like try to take repetition into that, I guess.
Yeah, it's really good for coaching and stuff too. Anytime like one player is trying to help another player out. Um, Shoot, I had something to build on top of that. Um, but now I can't remember. All right, well, I'll come back to me eventually. Okay, moving on to tournaments. What have you, since your early Yaz days, what have you kind of learned about making lineups? Are there any things that you've tried to like tendencies that you have, things that you try to avoid? A big one that I learned early on was not to just stick a random third deck into your lineup.
Mhm.
I like jammed a discard aggro into two good decks at one point. It did not go well for me. Um, or something that's being like just heavily targeted. There's something that's just like, oh, there's a lot of lineups that just like, crush this one deck. You definitely don't want that one just kind of pushed into your lineup.
Right.
Any thoughts?
Yeah. For me, like I definitely have like, like one or two decks I really play into. So for me, I try to build around that at the very least. So if I have like a cover pick, I'll try to put that in. For me, that's been Lurk for a really long time. But one season I tried to put Lurk in my lineup and it was atrocious. It was like terrible. And I
It was the
think
first one, the first season that it came out, I think, right? Is that the one?
give me
I
a
felt
second.
like it
I
was
forgot.
good then. It got
Yeah,
it got
yeah. Like
better.
I was running some weird like Lurk lists as well. But there's definitely like I feel like there's a lot of lineups that like don't make sense. You'll see a lot when you're playing like a seasonal open run or something like that. A lot of lineups that don't make sense, and I don't necessarily think they necessarily need to make sense. But there's also just bad lineups as well, which it's very hard to distinguish, and I think it's definitely like a little bit more of the meta call. Like if your bad lineup just like folds into like the top two or three decks in the meta, maybe you need to reconsider. That's kind of like a trap that I brought Lurk into the first season. So I was like, okay, if I don't run into any aggro, I'm fine. But like Poppy Zed or Poppy Lulu at the time, not even Poppy didn't come out. Lulu Zed at the time just like was so rampant on like live the week before. I just didn't expect people to bring it, and so it just like crushed me in the open runs. And for the tournaments that I've done relatively well, and I guess like the one where I brought TLC, Thresh, Gnosis, and Dragon, just three very, very solid decks that really didn't struggle into too much, or just had like a lot of playability into like the most of the meta. It just so happened that I was like comfortable on those decks, and it just so happened that they did well into a lot of things, which would be like kind of like the golden zone unless you're super confident about the decks that you're playing. If you can just like be very like even into a lot of things, then it's just kind of down to like more of like luck or chance when you're very comfortable with them. Whereas for the seasons that I brought some like weird ass stuff, I've definitely struggled a little bit more just because there's gonna be some stuff that I just don't necessarily expect, and or something I just haven't really practiced despite how much effort I put into it, that it can fall apart really easily. Just have one like chink in the armor, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you made a good point there about like the difference between comfort picks and just like a bad lineup. Like there's a difference. Like it's fine having a lineup that's not 100% cohesive because typically they're not going to be anyway. They'll be close. But if you have just three really good decks, there's three powerful decks. It doesn't matter if they're like bands are not exactly lined up. But if you want to go like let's take current meta. as an example. Like if you wanted to go plunder, action siver, and then you just throw in like I don't know, what's something that easily gets like, I don't know, darkness, right? Like that, like it's like, okay, well, there's gonna be lineups that are just gonna smoke darkness, and there's gonna be lineups that just like smoke GP's edge, and there'll probably be even lineups that smoke action siver. Like those are three decks that are well, GP's edge is really powerful, but it's getting targeted. Darkness is like kind of a meta call. It's like it's powerful, but like it wants to be like lined up with two other decks that do exactly kind of what it does. And then Action Silver again, very powerful, but like can be sort of countered. It does have some bad matchups. And so like your matchup table is just ends up being all over the place, and you're almost always going to be banning one of the good decks, one of the good matchups for one of your opponents, and their lineup's probably going to have a really good matchup into like one of the three of your decks. For example, maybe that wasn't the best example.
I get it. Like, I think that just like very basic advice is just to have like know what deck you're going to ban and just like make sure it makes sense in that kind of like lineup. Like,
Do you do scrims and stuff for that before? I typically don't at all. Literally day of, I like just because I'm busy, I don't have time. Like day of, I'm like looking up articles and like using our band calculator, someone's band calculator, and like trying to just kind of like feeling it out. Well, is that something that you're like, do you know basically always going in before like kind of like where your bands are gonna lie?
yeah, like I tend to build lineups around the ban.
Yeah.
And yeah, in scrims, not as it doesn't come up as much just because they might not be playing like the deck I'm like necessarily targeting or looking out for. And in those cases, I'm just like trying to get a feel for like the general cohesiveness of a lineup, or just like facing the three random decks that maybe I'm not necessarily expecting, just to see how they perform. But for me, the lineup is built around the ban or like the target.
Yeah.
There have been cases, yeah, there have been cases where I just like, I actually like last season. I think this is kind of interesting. I brought Lee Sin in a lineup that wants to ban Scion, which is interesting because that's like the best matchup for
Yeah.
Lee Sin. But against any Scion lineup, they're just going to ban Lee Sin, right?
Mhm.
So there's some merit in that where, if
It's a good point.
it doesn't have to be necessarily cohesive, but if you can guess what your opponent's bringing and want to ban from your side, you can get a much deeper understanding of like what exactly is going to go on when you get to that moment.
Yeah, that's like the next level, I think, because you're right. I think building lineups around bands has always made a lot of sense. It's like reverse engineering your lineup instead of trying to be like, okay, what are these three decks that have like good matchups against like a million other decks? It's like, okay, what's a deck that I want to target or soft target or kind of like make them cohesive by all being like not wanting to play this one deck because they'll end up probably having good matchups against a lot of other stuff, right? But then, like you say, the next level is doing things like that where it's like, okay, um, yeah, sure, Lee Sin is insane against Scion, but it's like never gonna play Scion. Like it's just never gonna. They're always just gonna ban it because that matchup is like unwinnable practically, as in Runeterra terms, about as bad as it gets. Um, and so it's gonna eat the ban, and then that lets you do like other interesting things with your lineup. Have you started to do stuff like that, or have you seen things like that where people are starting to go like more experimental with their bands, like dig deeper into the data and like think about stuff like that? Because that's something I've heard people touch on and stuff, but I think that's really like kind of the next level where you start to really get bigger edges in the tournaments from the bands like that.
Mhm. I think at least for me, most cases bans are pretty straightforward. It's generally not very much of like too much of a choice to make. Like if I'll see like a lineup, like instantly I know which deck I'm gonna ban, and I can get a good feeling of what my opponent's gonna ban as well. I think last open round there's just one of the 9 rounds where I was unsure of what I was supposed to ban and what my opponent was gonna ban from my side. Whereas, someone else spotted afterwards that they were expecting this ban, and actually I was like I put up like a coin flip. Okay, I'm gonna coin flip to see which deck they ban, and then so I'm gonna ban the other deck that I'm expecting, right?
Do you
I
actually flip a coin?
well, online. I flipped a virtual coin.
Virtual coin, okay.
But I flipped the
Yeah.
coin, and it landed on the deck that I didn't think they were gonna ban, but I was supposed to choose that, right? Because the coin flip doesn't lie.
Uh-huh.
But my like gut instinct like wrenched away at the last second, and I ended up being wrong, and
Oh
that
yeah.
that might have cost me the matchup. But it's hard to say. But generally, the most of the cases, I feel like it's relatively straightforward, just because if you have like a cohesive lineup, you're gonna have to face into like a weirdish kind of matchup where
Yeah,
it
that's
might.
the thing. That's the thing. A lot of the lineups are kind of like the same-ish, right? Like there's
Yeah,
not a lot of like crazy
like
lineup
you
stuff.
try to like either beat up control or you beat up like aggro, but then this one guy rocks like an aggro deck and a control deck, and they're like, oh shit, this is like the combination I didn't want to face.
Yeah, this stuff gets
Um,
interesting.
but generally, like most people are honestly pretty good at bringing like at least cohesive lineups, even if the lineup doesn't make sense. They're all in like a very similar category together. So there's not like I don't feel like there's too much like like way to game your opponent in that sense. Um,
Yeah,
but it's definitely interesting, and if that situation ever comes up, it's definitely hard. It's still even hard to try to gain that edge because what if your opponent isn't thinking the same way that you are?
very true. Very true. Okay, well, as we're wrapping up here, since we have you on, we obviously have to talk about Lurk. This is a deck that you put more time into just than just about anyone else. You put a lot of reps into it. Um, you know, give me the lowdown. Why did Lurk go from like last season it wasn't particularly good? This season, at the beginning of the season, it ripped up the ladder. It was crushing like dragons, and a lot of other people trying to experiment with new stuff. And then it kind of like it wasn't doing as good on the ladder, but it's still having some success in tournaments. So, you know, why is that? Why has that progression sort of happened? And what are your thoughts on it right now?
Yeah, like honestly, I think Lurk was always like, well, maybe not always, but last season it was already like close to being good. It just like the matchups it struggled in, like the Scion, the was Lulu Zen Lulu's that was played, but it struggled in like the Scion matchup. There's maybe a couple more like the really aggressive decks that it might have struggled into, but
Maybe is that tough at all?
yeah, that's like one of the tougher ones. Like I personally struggle a little into Poppy Z or Poppy
Zig?
the Ziggs. But now like I think that's actually a good matchup. So that's like a weird different story. But like it was close to being good, and I feel like this season was brought into the spotlight, of course, just as a way to counter dragons. And of course, the first week it just like completely farmed that deck inside a really good ladder performance. And then from there on out, it's like the people see this at least one deck Lurk, and then like the headlines come out, everyone's playing it, and then it just doesn't really. It's hard to stop that momentum from dying out. But for me personally, like it's just on the edge of like so many different matchups that it kind of just depends on like certain instances, like the plunder matchup, for example. Um, Sometimes you're dependent on like your opponent not drawing Sedge, because you can't do anything after that, or having the Pike spell for Sedge and being able to kill it. So like sometimes it boils down to like that specific moment, but like Lurk's just under respected, and that's like a good way to capitalize on it, honestly.
It is. I don't know if I okay. So I've been a Lurk hater, but mostly because you played it in that first season, and I was like, no, right now it's definitely not good. I will admit that it's totally fine as a deck now. Um, I don't love it still. I'm still not like I'm not like, oh hey, everyone should grab a Lurk, pick up that Lurk right now. Um, because I mean it is very difficult to play. But like when I do see you play it or some of the other top players, like you could see there's a difference that you guys, play it almost more like an action Sivir deck. Like you gotta like time everything, line everything up correctly. And most people play it like a Ziggs floppy deck. And they're just like guy. Um, myself included. Gotta get in there. So what are some tips maybe for anyone that's looking to pick it up right now?
Um, that's a tough one. I could like go on this for like 10 minutes, but I'll try to
Go
keep
for
it
it.
simple. Um, I think it's a lot more about planning like your turns out. Like if you have a hand of like especially when you have the predicts in your hand, right? You go one drop into predict and you already have like a 3 drop in hand, maybe you're looking for a 5 drop or like a 6 drop. Or if you have like a call-in pack of hands, you can use your predicts on like the defensive turns, like find a champion for next turn. there's just a lot of like planning can do out based off of like what hand state you currently have, and it's very important to think about what you want to be doing every turn by turn. I had a really interesting game yesterday. This was against a Silver Auction deck where I didn't draw any champions, but I just had a my opponent just did nothing for the first 2 turns, and this was turn 4 where I
Pretty
did
good for Lurk.
yeah. Once you snowball advantage, you just kind of keep it going. But there's this really pivotal turn 4 or going into turn 4 where I only had a 5-drop in hand. Like I had nothing to play that turn. And I had a Call of the Pack and a Bloodbait in my hand, which are cards you generally don't play until like on your attack turns, right? Or something like that. But I used the Call of the Pack on like before my attack turn just to see what I would get off of it to see if I can fill in that turn 4 because I had nothing to play, right? And then I got a 2-drop and a 5-drop. And then I'm like, okay, I can use this blood bait to get a 2-drop and then have 2 2-drops for my turn 4. Whereas if I had done neither of that, I still have a turn 4 play. And I thought that was a super interesting and not only very specific line, but it's just like very important to be planning out each turn. And sometimes just like high roll predicts like your champions and any matchup just doesn't feel
Every
like
deck could be
losable. But there's a good component, like if you like high roll, then like you high roll and so be it. But there's a good amount of components where it's like planning out your turns, not attacking unfavorably, not like slamming Snapjaw, so I'm just for Lurk if you like sack it. Because I think like maybe people just like miscategorize Lurk as more of just an aggressive style deck, whereas it's definitely more of like a mid-rangey deck and one in like a tempo deck, right? If you ever fall behind on tempo, it's pretty much impossible to like win the game. Just because it's so hard to like come back from that because you're only reliant on units. I
Yeah.
feel like those are like very important instances, and like the other parts are like you can play around stuns by playing not your Rek'Sai, just playing the 6-drop instead, or like you can play around like mini morph by like not like or like there's just like ways to play around other cards where like if you try to disrespect them too much and go for like your champion flips, then there's an easy way to get punished by that. But
Right.
on the flip side, there's instances where you have to go for it, and if they have it, they just have it. So definitely like it's definitely very hard when your deck is only units. You have to think about it differently. There's no combat tricks. You have to prioritize ways of gaining tempo off of trades alone. And I think that can be very unfamiliar to a lot of players where they're playing like, oh, I have the sharp side, I have the troll chant, and I can just like go into this attack or this trade and have a way to come out of it ahead. And that's just
Right.
not something Lurk has.
Yeah. And so because it is all units, oh well, sorry, first of all, are you playing the not the pike spell, the 2-mana
The Bone Scare.
bone skewer? Yeah, do you play bone skewer?
I
No.
have recently just cut it. I'm like I've been on one Bone Scare for the longest times, but I've put that back in for the 3rd Treasure Seeker, and
Interesting.
I'm like
I found it very interesting that it got cut because I feel like it's
mhm,
one of the cards I'm scared of the most when I'm playing
right,
against Lord. So what's the reasoning there?
yeah, like one against some like the aggro matchups like the Poppy Zigs having like Treasure Seeker is probably like the strongest card. Not only is it 2/1, it just trades favorably and anything.
So good.
The Waking Sands can just like stop like a Poppy attack in its tracks. And so it's definitely a card that not only can stop aggressive attacks, it's like a 2-mana heal 5 or something essentially. It can also put on a lot of pressure. So those turns where you're like trying to slow play something, you just like play Waking Sands first. If your opponent does nothing, they just take like 7 damage. And
Yeah.
that's definitely something that like Lurk really favors. If you just like sneak damage early on, like if they're down like 10 or 5 health, then like suddenly it doesn't really matter because you just have overwhelm units to punch through. But generally like you're gonna run out of cards in like a Lurk. You're gonna finish games usually with like 1 or 2 cards left in your hands. And it really comes down to just planning out your turns very carefully. There are instances, there are really like cute plays you can make with Bone Skier, but like it's like going down card advantage technically, and it
Yeah, and
like break
tempo,
your
right?
draw.
Which you mentioned is also
Right.
there.
Like I feel like it for me, Bone Skier is only a card you really want to be using on like Rek'Sai or Pike, which can sometimes be awkward, but also enable cute plays on the flip side. But generally, you'll find yourself in awkward situations where sometimes you'll win because you weren't playing this card. But like in these very niche cases, if I had it, I could just like destroy my opponent. And at the end of the day, I don't think it's as worth. But I do like the card. I'm not sure if it's right to not play one Bone Skier just to have it. But I'm very on the edge of it, and I'm not sure at the end of what's correct or not.
Okay. Talk to me a little bit about mulligans then. Since the deck is all units, is there like an opening sequence that you're almost always looking for? Then obviously there's always variables, but are there cards that you always keep, for instance?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think the most important part is just having one drops, especially from the token. So like if you try to keep like the call or the 3-drop predict in your opening hand but you don't have a 1-drop, you could like just miss Lurk on turn 1, and then it doesn't really matter if you hit Lurk on turn 3, right? So like mulling for 1-drops is super important. But on the flip side, I think I think like people also don't realize how heavy the deck can be. There's 3 8-drops, 3 6-drops, 3 5-drops,
Yeah.
etc. And so it can also be very easy to break your hand, which is one of the reasons why at the very beginning of the past seasons, I wasn't happy playing the 6-drop. But once I started keeping like 2 1-drops in my hand, it almost becomes really hard for you to break out your hand just because you have something to play for the first 2 turns. And then maybe
Right.
have some predicts afterwards. But once you have like the 1-drops, you can keep the predicts like the Chronomancer, the Caller. Those are really good cards. Find the champions, make your next turns better. And then like the slower matchups, you can keep like card like Snapdraw Swarm, where you want to be using it when you're not like, sacking it into like a 2-3, for example. That's like tempo loss and might lose you the game sometimes, which also some people don't realize. But like, in the slower matchups where like it's going to trade into like a 2-1 or they don't have a 2-drop, it's just a good way to like speed up your game.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That was kind of like what I was guessing, but I thought I would ask the expert. Um, okay, well, as we wrap everything up, do you have any other words of advice, wisdom on ladder climbing, tournament play, or Lurk before we sign off?
Not really. Just keep playing ladder. It's the best advice I can give.
Good luck, people. Check out masterguitarra.com, Avi.
That as well.
Speaking of which, Jason's article on Lisa and Zoe just dropped. Depends when you see this, but probably today. Just dropped right before we started recording this.
That's the pink received.
Yeah. And also let the folks at home know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Jasensational. You can find me at Twitch too. Haven't been super active. I same with YouTube, but I do have those as well. But you can find me there. I have a lot of deck guides posted there. Try to be a little bit more active in recent times, but hasn't really been there quite yet. So stay tuned. But you can find me on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter at Jasensational.
Yeah, I feel that. It comes and goes. We'll get back to it one day. Okay, well, that's it for us. Thank you, Jason, for filling in for Majin. Hope you feel better soon, big guy. See you next week. Thank you again to all our patrons, of course, that help support us. And that's it for us. We'll see you guys on Monday for the Runeterra show. Bye.